Hey, awesome soul. Are you watching from the edge of a volcano or the middle of a library? Big city or tiny town, I want to know. Tell me in the comments. Share this video with your crew, your grandma, or even your pet iguana. It all helps. Time to roll. The citrus bite of a freshly peeled satsuma still tingled on my tongue as I flicked the skin onto the polished coffee table. A half-full glass of deep red Bordeaux rested quietly in front of me, undisturbed. Her words drifted through my thoughts like a gusting wind, circling aimlessly, never quite settling long enough for me to understand what she was trying to say. Not that it mattered anymore, I'd heard it all too often. I just hadn't truly paid attention, until lately. Marcus, I'm going to the lake house for a few days. I need to clear my head, maybe get myself together, my wife of 14 years had said, sprawled across the awful wicker love seat she refused to part with. By the front door, 3 suitcases stood at attention. She twirled her new car keys in one hand, her head adorned with a straw hat, stylish and deliberate. "Can you help me get these bags into the car, honey?" she asked sweetly. I looked at her as if something alien had sprouted from her forehead. Rather than respond, I silently lifted my wine glass and walked into the vast, echoing kitchen. Without hesitation, I poured the Bordeaux down the drain, then stepped out onto the patio and twisted open a cold land shark. By the time I'd finished the beer, her car was already gone. I've developed a strong dislike for Bordeaux. It's a fine vintage, French, refined, and known to mature well with age. But Clara had developed a habit of ordering it at every restaurant, and soon, cases of it began appearing at home. I think my aversion really began the day I discovered 2 empty Bordeaux glasses in the guest bedroom. And beside them, a pair of gold cufflinks etched with the initials MB. They weren't mine. I've never owned gold cufflinks, nor have I ever wanted to. My phone buzzed in my pocket. "Marcus, don't forget to feed Thomas. He'll need a short walk before bed. You know how he gets if you skip it." I felt a blankness settle over me. Thomas wasn't mine. He was Clara's neurotic little dog who had a habit of soiling the kitchen if not walked each night. During the day, he usually ran around the garden on his own, but that wasn't my concern anymore. Thomas had already been dropped off at the local shelter. Clara hadn't been informed yet. By the time I cracked open a second, then a third bottle, my thoughts began to crystallize. There was more to my unease than just wine and that insufferable dog. This house, massive, burdensome, impossible, had begun to feel like a weight around my neck. Handed down from Clara's grandmother, the mansion had stood for over 175 years. Each generation tacked on more rooms, more wings, more headaches, except ours. 8 bedrooms, only 2 of which I ever used. 7 bathrooms, 2 front parlors, a formal dining room, a cavernous kitchen, a library, and endless unused nooks like the remnants of a forgotten era. A stone-lined basement led to a wine cellar. Original leaded glass still adorned the windows, and the slate and copper roof demanded constant maintenance. Clara adored every creaking floorboard like it was a part of her being. Me? I could barely look at the place without contempt. So there I stood at 39 years old, planted in the grand foyer of a home I couldn't bring myself to love, popping open my 4th land shark and surveying the scene like a soldier taking in the aftermath of a battle. By now she should have reached the lake house. If past behavior was anything to go by, something would come next. My phone vibrated again. "Marcus, it's burning," she cried through the line. "The lake house. It's in flames. And, oh my God, they found a body, Marcus. Are you hearing me? A corpse. Probably a drifter," I muttered. "Some homeless guy." Next chapter. I was never meant for this life. To be perfectly honest, my birth was probably a mistake. It all began with a drunken infantryman and a night of bad decisions. Martha Belvoir got pregnant, and the man, who had a solid reputation in the service, wanted no part in the consequences. If he had done the honorable thing, it might have landed him in jail. Instead, he crossed paths with Caleb P. Marcus one evening outside a dusty liquor store in Port Allen, Louisiana. Caleb wasn't a man who tolerated cowardice. He gave the soldier 2 choices: vanish, or take a beating from a cold-eyed, iron-fisted 58-year-old who feared no one. No one ever heard from the man again. Caleb P. Marcus was a grumpy, hardened man who lived to the age of 87 before the grave finally claimed him. He was also my great-grandfather, the closest thing to a real father I ever had. My mother lost her own parents in a car crash when she was young, and Caleb stepped up to raise her. I never got the full story, but it was decided I'd carry both surnames, Marcus Belvoir. The Maynards weren't flashy people, but they were tough and managed to make do. Caleb worked in the lumber business, always claiming he was rich in land, poor in cash. That wasn't quite true. We never went without. We spent summers on the Gulf Coast and had plenty of gifts and food at Christmas. When I was 13, my mother remarried, a pharmacist, and planned to move to Mobile. I chose to stay in Baton Rouge with Caleb. Looking back, it was the best decision I ever made. Not long after, she ran off with a truck driver to Mexico. Eventually, she surfaced in Sacramento, California. She sends postcards once in a while, just enough to remind me she's still alive. We've only been in the same room a handful of times since Caleb passed. Graduating from LSU was the catalyst for everything that followed. After earning my degree in civil engineering, I was hired by a company headquartered in New Orleans that needed someone flexible and ready to travel, a roving problem solver they could dispatch on short notice to wherever issues flared up. The position paid well and kept me intellectually engaged, but I didn't have a real place to call home. Weeknights meant rotating through one hotel after another, and come the weekend, I'd usually crash at my buddy Caleb's apartment. I first laid eyes on her in the lounge of a hotel in downtown Jackson, Massachusetts. At that point, I'd been living out of a suitcase for a couple of years, currently tied to a major construction project just blocks away. Drink in hand, I started drifting in her direction, casually, taking indirect paths, lingering here and there to avoid being obvious. She was seated with two other women, young like me. We were all somewhere in our 20s. Before I could even open my mouth, she glanced up and asked, "You working on that new site across the street?" Her question hit me right between the eyes. "Yes, ma'am," I replied. "I'm on the engineering crew. Name's Marcus Belvoir." I extended my hand. She shook it lightly, still smiling. "Clara Devereaux. And these are my friends, Priscilla and Candace." "Will you be sticking around till the project's done?" she asked. Her friends looked me over from head to toe while Clara kept things cordial. "As long as they keep signing the checks," I said with a shrug. I offered to get the next round, and the four of us ended up talking for quite a while. Truth be told, I would have been happy if something flirtier had unfolded, with any one of them. They picked up on that and turned it into a little sport, testing me, teasing me, pushing just enough to let me know they were on to me. All three had a certain flair for making an impression. I gathered that Clara worked in the high-rise across from my site, though she didn't say much beyond that. I assumed she must have noticed me coming and going from her office window. After about an hour, 3 sharply dressed guys showed up. That was my cue to make myself scarce. One of them, Martin Baylor, early 30s by the look of him, seemed especially attached to Clara. He didn't say anything, but I could feel the territorial vibe coming off him. Didn't faze me. He struck me as the type who never lifted anything heavier than a golf bag, one of those polished suits coasting on his dad's name. If he had tried to start something, I wouldn't have hesitated to shut it down. But there was no need for drama. I'd simply aimed in the wrong direction. So I ended the night with a glass of red poured over ice and headed back to my room. The next evening, I found myself back at the same bar, sipping a beer and half watching the game, when Clara slid into the seat next to mine. She looked more relaxed this time. Jeans, a worn Ole Miss t-shirt, sandals. No blazing lipstick, just a soft pink sheen. "Miss me?" she asked with a grin. "I've been missing this beer more," I said, cracking a smile. She laughed. "Don't let Martin bother you." "Wasn't worried about him," I said, and I meant it. Less than an hour later, we were upstairs. A few nights later, the same thing happened. And again. Over the next month, it became a quiet routine, eventually leading to a night where she stayed over at my place. The morning after, while we were having breakfast, she dropped a couple of unexpected truths. First, she said she worked for her father, the same real estate magnate behind the development I was working on. Second, she mentioned she'd be announcing her engagement to Martin Baylor that Friday during a dinner party. "So why are you here with me?" I asked bluntly. "Because I like you, and you're incredible," she said with a half smile. Under normal conditions, that might have been enough. But once a ring is involved, those reasons start sounding like convenient excuses. The truth was I liked her too, and yes, she was that incredible. "It's not as straightforward as it looks, Marcus," she said. "I figured," I told her. "You had me the second you stared me down at that bar like I didn't belong. There was something different about you." "Martin's just got the magic formula, huh?" I added, not out of jealousy, just trying to understand. She didn't take offense. She tilted her head and gave a soft, conflicted smile. "It's complicated. After Martin's father died, my dad bought up a controlling share of their firm. Now it's Baylor and Devereaux." She spoke like she was recounting someone else's life. "My father treats Martin like the son he never had. Gave him a senior vice president role. We've known each other forever. He was my first. Everyone just assumed we'd end up together. This engagement just seals what was always expected. So I'm the interlude before the wedding bells?" "I'm not saying I take anything back," I told her, "but I thought it meant something more." "It does," she said, her voice almost pleading. "I never planned for this to happen." I didn't need a breakdown to understand where she was coming from. In her world, where inheritance and influence meant more than emotions, love wasn't the compass. Things moved according to a different script, one written long before we even met. In that script, freedom was an illusion, and loyalty wasn't a matter of the heart. It was a family obligation. She chose to marry a man she truly cared for, though something more tempting proved harder to ignore. In the end, it didn't alter the outcome. In a few short weeks, I'd be moving on, and Clara Devereaux would officially become Mrs. Martin Baylor, co-namesake of Baylor and Devereaux. I'd be planted somewhere new, likely with another woman, already plotting my next exit. Or at least, that's what I kept repeating to convince myself. "To the future Mrs. Baylor," I said, lifting a glass of juice in mock celebration. And on we go. The assignment wrapped 2 weeks ahead of schedule. After a lazy long weekend in Caleb to recharge, I took on a new role, project engineer for a hotel build underway in Memphis. That stretch felt slower, tinged with a kind of gentle melancholy after the whirlwind with Clara. Most evenings, I stayed in, dining solo, occasionally sipping a beer alone at the bar downstairs. Eventually, a few younger teammates dragged me out for a night on Beale Street. They pushed drink after drink into my hands until I crossed into full-blown humiliation. When I woke up, I was lying beside a stunning older woman who didn't know my name and didn't care. She kept the fun going straight through breakfast. Her name was Bella, newly divorced, still basking in the novelty of no longer being second in someone else's life. Her ex had traded her in for a younger model the year before, leaving her with a comfortable nest egg and a restless urge to explore the version of her life she hadn't yet lived. For that weekend, I was part of her adventure. I admired her spirit, that vibrant energy some women find after cutting loose from men who never really saw them. She had 2 daughters, but they were with their father and his new wife that weekend, so Bella was free. Over coffee, we decided to spend the next few days together, wandering Memphis, strolling along the river, and seeing what the city could offer. "What do you want to be when you grow up, Marcus?" she teased, grinning over her latte. "I thought about farming," I joked, "but I can't even manage to grow weeds." There was a ring of truth to that. Years ago, Caleb had tried to get me interested in a 300-acre tract of land he'd picked up at auction in Port Hudson, just above Baton Rouge. He was leasing it out to a cattle guy. But I hadn't cared. Back then, I was at LSU, more preoccupied with soccer and chasing women than tending soil. "My first boyfriend was a farmer," Bella said, "back in Greenville, Massachusetts. His family grew soybeans and anything else that might sell. They'd been serious until she left for college. That's when I got bit by a shark." "A shark?" I asked. "My ex-husband," she said. "He was finishing law school. I was a clueless freshman from a small town." Yikes. "Yeah, my first boyfriend? He's doing great. Married, 4 kids, owns his own business." "And the shark?" I asked. "We got married 2 years later. Had twins pretty fast. Guess he ruined me for the decent ones." For some reason, I thought of Martha Belvoir, wondering how her life might have unfolded differently had she been given a path like Bella's, even if that path included a man who later ran off. That Saturday, Bella and I spent hours by the river. We took a dinner cruise that night and ended up back in my room. By the next morning, I felt like myself again and marveled at women like Bella, still bursting with life. Sunday was more of the same. By Monday, she was back to juggling her job and her kids, and even though the age gap between us wasn't huge, it hung in the air like something unspoken. Still, she gave me her business card before leaving. Over the next 4 months, I wrapped up the Memphis project, took a breather in Baton Rouge, and then picked up a planning role at the New Orleans office. 6 months without the constant back and forth of air travel felt like a small luxury, but before long, the old restlessness returned. It didn't take long to scratch the itch. "Marcus, you're heading back to Jackson. The client asked for you," said Sam, my boss, over lunch at Ryan's Pub on Bienville. "What's the deal at the site?" I asked. "No clue," he shrugged. "They just want to revisit some of the designs, and specifically requested the guy from the last job." He grinned. "Take that as a win." 2 weeks later, I checked into the downtown Marriott in Jackson. That night, I found myself nursing a cold beer in the same bar I'd haunted during my previous assignment. The following morning, I had a meeting with the clients, none other than Baylor and Devereaux. "I'm Cecil Devereaux. Let's do some introductions," said the older gentleman, probably in his late 50s or early 60s. Despite his obvious wealth, he carried himself without pretense. They offered coffee and pastries as we all settled in. If Martin Baylor recognized me, he gave no indication. The job itself made the return trip worthwhile. Their firm was planning a sweeping atrium addition on the far end of the creditor's state building. The idea was to link it to the main structure with either a sky bridge or a wide underground concourse featuring shops and a grocery. Their design team walked us through early concepts, and we spent the day ironing out logistics and refining the plan. As we wrapped up, Mr. Devereaux excused himself for another meeting, and the rest of us started tossing around ideas for where to get dinner. Martin Baylor bowed out, citing personal matters as his reason. As we shook hands, the only thing echoing in my mind was how unbelievable it had been to sleep with his wife. He looked me squarely in the eye and said, "Impressive." I gave a quick nod, muttered something vaguely complimentary about his atrium designs. Nancy, sitting close by, must have picked up on what Clara had been doing. Her sly little smile said more than words, like the Mona Lisa if she knew all your secrets. The irony? I'd always sworn off affairs with married women. Here's the thing, Marcus. Getting involved with another man's wife sets off a chain reaction you don't want. First, you're stepping into territory that never belonged to you. It's like smashing into someone's home just to spit on their floors. Second, the moment you find yourself enjoying it, you lose any respect you had for yourself. Because if she can cheat on him, what's stopping her from cheating on you? And third, pack your bags fast. More men have been buried over this kind of mess than by anything the law ever threw at them. Stick to unattached women, son. There are millions out there. And trust me, your conscience will rest easier. Caleb first gave me that talk when I was about 15. I was doing yard work for a woman whose trucker husband was gone most of the week. Caleb knew her type. She liked her men young and unfamiliar, and I checked both boxes. His warning came just in time. One day, the husband showed up unannounced, caught her in bed with some guy from Prairieville. He shot them both. They lived, but he did 6 years in Dixon, and she still walks like she's dragging a chain. That night, it was hard to keep Caleb's words in mind, but Clara made forgetting them much easier. After a couple of drinks and some flirty talk, she and Nancy exchanged hugs, a kiss goodbye, and left. I stayed back at the bar, unsure whether to finish my beer or head upstairs and take matters into my own hands. I chose both. The following days were a blur of meetings and disputes over the development plans. By Friday, everything had stalled around the Sky Bridge. I called the office, said I'd be extending my stay a week to reevaluate our position. I hadn't laid eyes on Clara since that dinner, but Friday night, I sat at the bar while a disco cover band tore through hits from KC and the Sunshine Band. Clara caught my eye, pulled me onto the dance floor. She looked flawless, and her gaze never wavered from mine. During a slow song, I noticed the ring on her finger. It wasn't anything fancy, just a modest opal in a simple band. "You think Mr. Baylor would lose it if he knew his wife was all over another man tonight?" I asked. "He's away. Some college reunion in Houston with his Ole Miss friends," she said. "He'll be back in time for your Monday meeting." "That's not exactly what I meant," I said as the music faded. "I suggested we sit for another round. What I'm saying is, I doubt he'd be thrilled about me getting cozy with his wife. Wouldn't make for easy small talk over cocktails." "Oh, he'd be upset, sure, if he saw us. But I'm not telling him, and I see no reason why he'd ever find out." "So why didn't you tag along to Houston?" "I don't know those people, and I hate those kinds of events, especially in Houston. I'd much rather be here, with you." She suddenly sprang to her feet, waving. "Over here, hey!" 3 women in matching dresses and high heels walked in. Priscilla, Candace, and Nancy had returned for the night. They dragged over another table and joined us. Candace leaned toward Clara with a wicked grin. "So, you found your eye candy. You planning to share?" The whole group laughed. I couldn't help but chuckle, too. Honestly, if Clara hadn't been wearing that ring, I'd have preferred we stayed a party of 2. But instead, I found myself tasting 4 different brands of trouble, each one a little more dangerous than the last. The night became a performance, fluid, heated, expertly choreographed. Candace wasn't bluffing when she joked about sharing. She made her intentions clear during the slow songs. Unfortunately for her, and maybe for me, Clara stepped in. "There are plenty of men here for her to dance with," she murmured in my ear. "Maybe," I said. "But she looks like she's got a craving for something spicy tonight. Lucky for her, I know a few good recipes." "Oh, I'm sure you do," Clara said, her tone dripping with implication. That was the rhythm of the night. When we returned to the table, Candace and Nancy had already paired off with 2 guys who looked like they'd hit the jackpot. I sat down and started counting my losses. "Don't look so heartbroken, Mr. Belvoir," Clara said, flashing a dazzling smile. "The night's not over yet." Then she turned to Priscilla. "Let's dance." So I left Mrs. Clara Devereaux Baylor at the table and took to the floor with Priscilla. She leaned in close. "You do know she's hoping to recreate that special evening you 2 shared before she and Martin hosted you, right?" "Maybe," I replied. "But I've got a code I live by, and by it Martin Baylor's got nothing to worry about." She chuckled, her eyes sweeping the room. "That's funny. I don't see Mr. Baylor anywhere," she said, laughing as we headed back to the table. The rest of the group had trickled in by then. Clara raised her glass high. "To a beautiful evening, ladies." And just like that, the toast was sealed. Belvoir and I had urgent business pulling us in another direction. "Come on this way," the trio of young women called out in perfect unison, while I sat there, reeling and disoriented. They rose gracefully, melting into the electric rhythm of the party crowd. "Well now, Marcus," she purred with a sly smirk, "should we go see if the maids fluffed your pillows just right?" In that instant she transformed, no longer the woman I once remembered, but something far more intoxicating. Caleb's voice rang in my ears like a warning bell. "Stay clear of married women. Always. Don't even think about it." "Clara," I said, trying to ground myself, "you know where I stand on chasing someone else's wife. I'm not built for that kind of mess." She cast a glance at her bare ring finger, then looked back at me, amused. "This?" she said with a laugh. "Easily taken care of." With one fluid move, she slid the ring off and slipped it into her purse. "There, problem solved. I'm single now," she said with a devilish grin. "So what are you waiting for, Marcus?" Caleb had never warned me about this kind of ambush. I stood there, stunned. She leaned closer, voice low and playful. "Truth is, Marcus, Martin and I never even went through with the wedding. Come upstairs. I'll tell you everything tomorrow morning." I must have looked like I was weighing every possible outcome because she stood, took my hand, and led me toward the elevator. And of course I followed, like a moth dumbly circling the flame. The truth was I'd missed her more than I cared to admit. Just seeing her again reminded me how tightly she still held the strings. It felt dangerous. It felt right. In that moment, there was almost nothing I wouldn't have done for her. The next morning, sipping black Danish coffee, she finally laid it all out. "So here's how it went," she began. "We threw this big engagement bash. Martin gave me this rock of a diamond, and everything was picture perfect until she crashed the party." She paused, clearly enjoying the retelling. One of those jealous drama queens. Naturally, she caused a scene. Clara stirred her coffee slowly, a wicked smile tugging at her lips. After my father printed the announcement in the paper, she must have realized she'd been played. "Who was she?" I asked. "His mother," Clara said, feigning innocence with wide eyes. But not just any mother. Martin had knocked up Monique Pierce. The name landed like a brick, and Clara saw the recognition hit me. "Her family basically owns half the state," she said. "And my father? He does business with them through lending state." When the truth surfaced, her father called Martin aside to confirm what Monique's mother had claimed. Martin didn't even deny it. "In families like ours," she said with a dry chuckle, "if you put a baby in the wrong heiress, the wedding dress isn't optional." And just like that, her engagement to Martin evaporated. He married Monique. "Sure, I was furious," she admitted. "But I got over it, fast. Told myself I was saving myself for you." She laughed, and I couldn't help but smile back. "So where does that leave us?" I asked. "You're going to be my husband," she answered, certain as sunrise. "And we're going to have our fairy tale life, right here in Jackson." She believed it so fiercely I started to believe it too. "Then why does your father keep Martin around?" I asked. "Family pride," she said. "And I asked him to. I still care about Martin, even if he made a mess of things. He stood by the child, gave it his name. That means something." "But he's not marrying me," she added, looking at me pointedly. "You are." Then she threw a jab at the woman I'd been seeing in Memphis. "I'd rather you mess around with that sultry thing in Memphis than marry some overbred rich girl with a yacht and a prenup. She'll probably make you sign papers the second she gets her nails done." "And if she does," Clara added, raising a brow, "make sure she signs one too. Fair's fair." She leaned back, self-satisfied. "Once I've got my empire built, you'll be swimming in it. Just wait." That's when Caleb, grizzled and unimpressed, poured another shot and muttered his thoughts. He loved hearing stories about my nights with Bella, but legal matters, especially prenups. That's when his voice got firm. "You're my only heir," he'd say. "All this land, one day it's yours. More than you can handle, probably." But his last warning about Clara stuck with me, and maybe I should have listened harder. "Son," he told me, "if you go through with this, keep your eyes peeled and your mouth shut. These high society folks, their morals ain't run on the same clock as ours. Don't hate 'em for it. It's just the way they were raised. And you," he added, fixing me with a look, "your country through and through. If your mama were alive, God rest her soul." "She's in California," I interrupted. "Right. California," he muttered dismissively. "Well, here in the bayou, we've got our own ways of handling slick city boys. If some perfume banker tries to take your woman, just remember, there's plenty of gators around here who'd chew through his money clips for fun." He was old school, no doubt about it. After a real sit-down with Papa Devereaux, whose nickname still made me grin, we sealed the deal. Clara and I got married. He was all business, though. Said there were family standards to uphold, and I respected that. Truth be told, Cecil Devereaux was an upright man, one of the fairest I've ever known. When my boss approved my transfer to the Jackson office, an offer that spared me the daily grind to New Orleans, I accepted, partly to stay nearby and help keep an eye on his daughter. Though my position still required me to travel frequently, Cecil often invited me along on his business outings. I declined every time. Eventually, I was promoted to regional manager. The new role drastically cut down my travel demands. Next chapter. The early years of our marriage played out like something scripted by a romantic novelist. At least, that's how some people saw it. We were constantly learning each other in that deep, affectionate way only people in love truly understand. Sure, there were the expected formal dinners and lavish parties at the Devereaux estate, where the airs were as heavy as the wine was flowing. Still, I never had much trouble with Mr. Devereaux himself. He treated me with a straightforward kind of respect. We spoke plainly, without tiptoeing around pride, and to his credit, he never took offense. Right before our 4th anniversary, a quick succession of events flipped all our plans on their heads. It began when Cecil Devereaux collapsed during a charity golf tournament. His heart failed suddenly, and he crumpled like a coat slipping off a hanger. Evelyn, his wife, dealt with the news with unsettling calm. This seems like the right time to recall the family setup. Clara's mother died while she was still a child, and Cecil remarried when Clara was 14, became her stepmother, and despite everything, they remained close. Cecil had made sure Evelyn had both social status and influence, enough to keep her secure and well-regarded. When he died, Clara inherited 45% of his estate, Evelyn received 35%, and I was left with the remaining 20%. That split mirrored the company's ownership. Those percentages directly translated into voting shares at Baylor and Devereaux. Evelyn secured a place on the board and quickly brokered an alliance with most of the directors to appoint Martin Baylor as the new CEO. With her inheritance, Clara stepped away from the business world completely by the time she turned 27, dedicating herself to local charities instead. Meanwhile, Evelyn remarried. Not just anyone, but Fox Pierce, who happened to be Martin Baylor's father-in-law and a highly esteemed public figure. Their marriage effectively linked the Baylor and Devereaux family enterprises at the board level. Clara showed little interest in corporate affairs after that, unless she had to attend a shareholders' meeting or a formal function. The next big change came after the death of Clara's maternal grandmother. Mabel Nason hailed from a long line of old Southern wealth, her family fortune tracing back to just before the Civil War. One clever ancestor had moved most assets into gold before the Union Army arrived, and that gold-fed legacy endured through generations. Mabel left her massive estate to Clara, and we, Marcus Belvoir and Clara Devereaux Belvoir, moved into roughly 1/3 of the sprawling mansion off the Natchez Trace. Then I lost the only close family I had left on this side of the Mississippi, my uncle and longtime mentor, Caleb P. Marcus. He passed at 87, more from exhaustion than disease, and left all his possessions to me, including his home in Baton Rouge. He used to joke that he might have left something to my mother if only he'd known where she disappeared to. She resurfaced in Baton Rouge for the funeral, looking like she'd stepped out of a West Coast lifestyle magazine, sun-kissed, slim, and dressed to draw stares even while in mourning. She brought along husband number 3, a silver-haired grifter in his 60s, who clearly enjoyed the financial windfall from her previous marriage. Martha Belvoir, Porter Sinclair had struck gold in Sacramento by marrying Arthur Sinclair III, who died unexpectedly 3 years ago, leaving her a fortune that bordered on the obscene. Caleb always chuckled at that twist of fate. Now she was back, offering a polished presence at the quiet send-off he'd planned. Only a handful of people were invited: my mother, Clara, Caleb's attorney, myself, and a discreet female companion Caleb had kept close even in his later years. After the burial, technically in my family's own plot, we gathered in his sitting room as the lawyer read his will. As expected, I was named the sole beneficiary, though Caleb had included a personal note asking me to use my judgment when distributing assets. We didn't go into details, but I did arrange a modest allowance for the mourning mistress. My mother had no interest in anything Caleb left behind, so we settled everything quickly and resumed our lives. By the time the dust settled, I found myself in the position Caleb used to describe as owning plenty of land but not much cash. I now held titles to timberland across Louisiana, Mississippi, and East Texas, along with some leased farmland. There were also 2 small commercial properties in downtown Baton Rouge, a house and a bank account that wouldn't turn any heads. I instructed the lawyer to keep it all bundled under one managed portfolio, promising to review the holdings periodically. Rental income continued to come in steadily, but I rarely had the bandwidth to handle the details. My job took up most of my time, and with Clara's schedule packed as well, I let the attorney's office manage the day-to-day. Next chapter. Clara's social circle, her old debutante friends, whom I half-jokingly called the Rag Parade, had all landed solid marriages and slid effortlessly into lives of refined Southern ease. Priscilla and Candace each married wealthy attorneys, both considerably older than they were. Nancy hit it off with a former Ole Miss soccer standout who'd gone into politics and was now a state senator eyeing a congressional run. They often gathered at the old Nason mansion, where Clara hosted with the kind of effortless charm that left no doubt who ran the show. I didn't mind the get-togethers. The women were all knockouts, and with their typical poolside attire leaning toward the minimal, I spent many afternoons in the shade with a cold drink and no complaints. Our marriage hummed along without any real hiccups for the next few years, steady, quiet, uneventful. At least that was the case until what I now refer to as the conversation. "Hey Nancy, you know who you're bringing to replace Bo?" Priscilla tossed the question out casually one afternoon while stretched out by the pool. I was nearby, crouched over the salt filter at the pump house, staying out of the way. "Tried a couple guys last week," Nancy answered with no hesitation. "Ben was useless. One round and done. Didn't even break a sweat. But Santos? Different story. That guy just keeps going like some Energizer bunny on a mission." Candace turned to Clara and grinned. "Sounds a bit like your man, huh, Miss Belvoir?" "Christ," I muttered to myself, just loud enough to hear. "Could you not say that so loud?" "She's inside," she said, nodding toward the house with a smirk before turning her attention back to me. "Some things just don't need to make it to the husband's ears, right?" "Preach," Priscilla added with a laugh. "But seriously," she continued, "why even waste time on Martin when you've got your own top-shelf solution?" Nancy jumped in. "Every respectable woman we know has a backup man, unless she's unlucky enough not to afford one." Clara joined in their laughter. "If Martin hadn't stepped in, someone else would have." She shrugged like it was just a fact of life. "So Nancy," someone asked, "is Santos your go-to?" That was my sign to slip away quietly, sneaking through the side entrance and into the house. I made my way to the basement, already telling myself it was time to form a solid strategy. The woman I had in mind was probably in her early 20s, maybe younger. She worked at a law firm during daylight hours, but by night she was a fixture at a Baton Rouge bar, getting sharper at 9-ball with every game. She beat me 3 times straight before I started buying her drinks. Eventually, she agreed to come back with me, to the big upstairs bedroom in the old house Caleb had left me years ago. I'd always aimed to keep things moving, or at least give off the impression that I was. Rather than waste energy on constant travel, I began using that house as a base of operations and kept a close watch on the briefcase Caleb had trusted me with. My time was divided, part of it spent in Baton Rouge, a portion managing my financial interests, and the rest split at Clara's, though I hadn't thought of her as a wife in ages, more like a beautiful habitual adulterer. Her father had owned a house on a large piece of land up by a reservoir near the top of the Pearl River. Clara bought it off Evelyn Pierce and converted it into her own private sanctuary. I never liked the place, just a secluded cabin swallowed up by trees along the lake. But she spent plenty of time there, usually with one particular guy. When I imagined my own way out, my mind always returned to the Atchafalaya Basin. Caleb used to keep a sizable boat stashed deep in one of the swamp's more remote corners. You couldn't get there unless you arrived by water, and unless you were a swamp critter with built-in navigation, GPS was a necessity just to find the spot. That's where the real operation would fall into place. "You can pull this off easily if you've got the brains for it," said the massive figure next to me, sipping flat beer like it was fine wine. Rudy Cormier reclined on a porch chair facing the houseboat docked nearby, the one we called Camp. He puffed on a thick cigar, waving the smoke out of his face like a man without a care. The youngest of the Cormiers, Rudy was Manfred's son, infamous, sure, but reliable if you were in his circle. He and Caleb had been tight back in their wild days. "We've got to get all this junk off the shoreline and move it around enough so no one finds it again. You following?" Rudy said. "If you can get it there, it disappears, but that kind of cleanup's gonna cost you." I didn't argue. He knew I was ready to pay for discretion, and I had full confidence in his crew to handle the job, quietly, cleanly, no questions asked. Once the logistics were squared away, we headed back to the houseboat to drink and unwind. Back in Jackson, I checked in on Clara. According to her phone's location, she was holed up at the lake house. I could have confirmed it any number of ways. Surveillance cameras, live video feeds, drone flyovers. But I didn't bother. The fury had faded, leaving only the dull ache of disinterest. She loved her tech gadgets anyway. FEMA could probably track her better than I could. It was time to move ahead with the next phase of the plan. "Clara," I asked during dinner one night, "have you ever thought about selling your shares and putting the money into something more aggressive? The dividend you're getting is pathetic compared to what's out there." She hadn't. Over time, she'd become complacent, like a pampered heiress who'd lost her edge by 37. I kept pressing the idea until she finally agreed to talk to a broker. I already had the perfect person in mind. Despite his rougher qualities, Rudy Cormier could clean up nicely when he needed to. He'd mastered the act of professionalism, just enough to fool the right crowd. His size was still impossible to ignore, but he had a certain swagger that some women found appealing. Clara wasn't immune to it. She was intrigued. Soon enough, she accepted his dinner invitation. By the end of the evening, Rudy had her seriously mulling over the idea of liquidating her Baylor and Devereaux stock, on the condition that the company's goodwill was accurately valued. She walked away from the sale with just under $15 million after taxes, a major upgrade from the pathetic 2% yield she'd been collecting for years. Once the transaction was done, Clara dispersed the money into a spread of legitimate investments. Meanwhile, Baylor and Devereaux restructured into a minority-held investment firm based out of New Orleans, its ownership tangled and hard to trace, by design. Later, I overheard her on the phone with Martin Baylor. "You did what?" he barked. "I moved the shares I inherited into accounts with better returns and had them properly valued. I'm about to double my income," she said, like it was no big deal. "Christ, Clara. My entire job hinges on that trust. Now it's gone. The new owners could have me replaced within weeks." He looked like he might break down, but he didn't. "Show me," he demanded. "I need to see exactly what you did." They rushed up to her office, where she pulled up her accounts and walked him through everything. He couldn't argue. She'd secured a valuation that blew their other clients' deals out of the water. Still, if she hadn't been such an unapologetic whore, I might have actually admired the move. But by that point, any care I had left for Clara's loyalty was long gone. That ship had sailed and sunk. Caleb Warning had been hard to shake. It echoed more often than I cared to admit. There were lingering issues I hadn't yet resolved. Watching her laugh like a schoolgirl with the man who should have been me, the one she'd once promised forever to, made me wish for a hungry gator to even the score. Martin Baylor had worn the CEO crown at B&D for close to 10 years, skating by with minimal impact. But ever since Evelyn Pierce, his wife's stepmother and Clara's adoptive mother, threw her weight behind him, he wore his position like armor, convinced no one could touch him. As if that weren't enough, he was sleeping with my wife, the very person who helped him climb the ladder, and the stench of betrayal hung in the air like rotting meat. Still, I kept up appearances. I continued to hand Evelyn my proxy vote, letting her wield it like a weapon, and in doing so, Baylor kept parading around the boardroom like royalty. The investment firm down on Canal Street in New Orleans wasn't in any hurry to shake things up, but the cracks were starting to show. Clara was getting careless. They didn't even bother hiding the evidence anymore. Empty bottles of expensive French wine abandoned on the nightstand as if a maid would just sweep it all away. And Baylor, in his arrogance, left behind his monogrammed 24-karat gold cufflinks like party favors after a wedding. Far as I could tell, their little joyride was nearing its end. Everything changed the day I met with Evelyn and told her I'd shifted my proxy rights to Manicourt and Sizemore, a private equity firm based in New Orleans. They were planning their takeover at the upcoming board meeting. I didn't need confirmation. Evelyn would rush to tell Martin Baylor, and he'd go running to Clara with the news. "You handed your vote to those clowns, and your husband gave them his shares too?" Martin was seething. "Do you even understand what this means?" Clara blinked slowly, confused and unsure. But you've still got the family trust, Martin. Doesn't that cover you? He looked at her like she'd grown a second head. Clara, the trust only gives me a third of my salary. That's it. Don't you get it? His fury erupted. He flung his wine glass into the fireplace, sending shards flying like shrapnel. Easy for you to say. You've got millions to fall back on, and you're floating through life like it's one big spa weekend. She reached out, trying to console him, offering quiet words of comfort. Don't worry, I'll take care of you. She probably meant well, but for a guy like Baylor, who saw himself as a dominant force, those words landed like an insult. He pulled away, grabbed his jacket, and stormed out the front door, boiling over. Meanwhile, I had a front row seat to the whole meltdown, watching it unfold through a hidden camera feed. You better get back to Jackson and shut this thing down, Rudy Cormier said, grinning, his gold tooth catching the light like a spotlight. It's go time. That was all the motivation I needed. The wheels turned, and I headed back to Natchez Trace. The place was deserted, except for that worthless little dog that gave me a look like I was the intruder. Some friend had given Clara a purebred Yorkie for her birthday. Little Pest never learned not to crap on the tile. An hour later, he was barking behind a cage at animal control, and I had the house to myself. Call me cruel. Call me cold. I've been called worse. I never heard her come in that night, and by the time she woke up the next morning, I was already gone. When I got back around noon, she was packing again. I'm heading up to the lake house for a few days, she said. I need to clear my head, maybe reset. That was her explanation, delivered while I lounged on that hideous sofa she adored, never could figure out her taste in furniture. It was her sanctuary, and that was fine. I had my own places where I could vanish. At that moment, none of it seemed to matter. A few minutes later, she backed out of the driveway and drove off. I cracked open a light beer, don't judge me, and then the phone rang. Marcus, the lake house, there's been a fire. Her voice trembled, thick with panic. And there's a body in the wreckage. Marcus, do you hear me? Somebody's dead. Probably a vagrant, I muttered, half lit already. Some poor soul who stumbled in looking for shelter. But when Clara arrived at the lakefront property, the place was engulfed in flames. Nothing left but charred beams and smoke curling into the sky. Fire crews and deputies were picking through the remains. Eventually, they found a body, burned beyond recognition, inside one of the bedrooms. Clara was in no condition to talk, hysterical, and the authorities agreed to postpone the questioning. After she pulled herself together enough to string words into sentences, the investigation got moving. The verdict? Arson. Whoever said it had used way too much accelerant and didn't know what they were doing. By 5 that evening, 2 fire investigators knocked on my door. They wanted to hear my version of events, where I'd been from the moment I left until just before midday. Luckily, my lawyer was already there with me, going over some financial paperwork, specifically my holdings in Baylor and Devereaux. The timing, as you might guess, didn't look great. Mr. Belvoir, can you verify your whereabouts earlier today? Before I could get a word in, my attorney jumped in. Are you saying Mr. Belvoir is a suspect in this matter? He's being held as a material witness, for now, unless new evidence points us in another direction. My client understands your position, one of the agents remarked to my lawyer. My attorney responded with a subtle nod, offering no objection. Earlier that morning, I'd had breakfast and a scheduled business meeting with Evelyn Pierce at her home. Her husband, Fox, was there briefly before heading out for another engagement. I arrived promptly at 9 a.m. and left just before 11:30. Both of them can confirm the timing, and my phone's location data should support it. Then came the question, are you acquainted with a man named Martin Baylor? Yes, very well, I replied. He's the CEO of a company in which I hold shares, originally owned by my late father-in-law. Martin practically grew up with my wife. Their history goes way back. He also happens to be married to Fox Pierce's daughter. The agents murmured between themselves, tossed out a few more questions, and after offering polite goodbyes, took their leave. As soon as the front door latched behind them, Clara appeared. Marcus, she said, voice tight. The authorities think the body from the fire might be Martin. Our Martin. My expression soured into a skeptical frown. Martin who? "Martin Baylor," she said sharply, irritated. "Don't play dumb." "I know who you meant," I replied with a faint, almost amused smile. She looked at me strangely, as if weighing my reaction, then silently went upstairs. I didn't follow. I walked my attorney to his vehicle, took a slow lap around the pool, and eventually collapsed into a chair on the back patio. In the following days, things began to shift. The investigation moved down to Natch's trace. Forensics and the coroner determined that the charred body wasn't Martin's. The attempt at staging his death was crude, designed more to provoke curiosity than fool professionals. He hadn't been seen since he left his office the week before. Agents contacted the Presslers, who revealed that Martin had intended to leave B&D after the quarterly board meeting. Then things got more troubling. Just 2 days earlier, Clara discovered her financial accounts had been emptied. Transaction logs showed a flight ticket purchased in Martin's name. Surveillance footage confirmed that someone matching his appearance boarded a plane to Costa Rica a week prior. Clara had no idea how he accessed her finances, and she certainly wasn't about to confess to the long-running affair she'd had with him, not while I was in the room. Her only real hope was that the authorities would track him down and retrieve what he'd stolen. Later that evening, long after everyone had gone to bed, I found her crying alone in her study. "I have to head to Baton Rouge tomorrow," I told her. "Are you okay staying here with all this going on?" She gave a faint nod. "Maybe the three amigos will swing by," I added. I slept well that night like a man without a care. The next morning, I packed 2 bags. If she noticed anything was gone, she didn't bring it up. As the car pulled away from the house, I glanced toward old Mabel Nason's property. I remembered something Charlie used to say, "Land rich, not a nickel in the bank." I laughed to myself all the way to Baton Rouge. Later on, a twinge of guilt got the better of me, so I moved some extra funds into Clara's account. It wouldn't return her to the lifestyle she once enjoyed, but with that and the insurance payout from the fire, she could maintain a respectable life in her oversized house. More importantly, it kept any prying eyes from getting too curious. At one point, I'd thought about filing for divorce, but stirring up trouble didn't seem worth the risk. Instead, I made regular trips to Jackson to maintain appearances with the Presslers. One evening, Clara and I sat by the Pearl River. The agents and detectives had long since packed up and moved on. It was time for some clarity. "Clara," I asked, "why was Martin's alleged body found near the lake?" She hesitated. Before she could answer, I leaned in closer. "Let me put it to you straight, Bayou style. I'm guessing you and that son of a bitch have been sleeping together for years. Before you open your mouth, think hard. You don't know what I know. And believe me, there are plenty of boys down south who can wring the truth out of slick Jackson types until there's nothing left but a whisper. Understand me?" She stiffened, her eyes misty but resolute. She didn't collapse into tears. Instead, she gave a slow nod and started to talk. She began at the beginning, confirming everything I'd already suspected and uncovering far more than I was ready for. When she finished, I walked her back inside without saying a word. In Jackson, I still wore the mask of a loving husband. But things were different now. I wasn't married to Clara Devereaux Belvoir. She belonged to me, Marcus Belvoir, as long as I allowed it. How long that would last, I hadn't yet decided. Martin Baylor was now officially named as the one behind the fire, the fraud, and the theft of Clara's wealth. He'd been added to the FBI's most wanted list. I doubted we'd ever see him again. Clara fell back into old patterns, more or less. But sometimes I'd catch a flicker of panic in her eyes. She was still as stunning as ever, still irresistible to men. Her social circle, the polished wives of perfect husbands, carried on with their lives. But she never rejoined them, not once. Whether it was shame or surveillance keeping her away, I couldn't tell. I remembered something she'd said to me early on, when this whole thing first came to light. If it hadn't been Martin, there wouldn't have been anyone else. Maybe that single thought was what set this entire scheme in motion. Next chapter. The planks groaned beneath the boat as it swayed gently in the wind, while relentless rain came down in sheets, blurring the world beyond. It wasn't a full-blown hurricane, but even a weak tropical storm demands caution when you're buried in the heart of the wild. When I was still a boy, Caleb would take me out into the Atchafalaya Basin. He said it would forge me into a man, and looking back, I'd say it did. When I hit 14, he dropped me off out there, just me alone for 7 straight days. My supplies? A few pounds of dried beans, a couple links of sausage, and whatever odds and ends I could scrape from the galley pantry, mostly Cajun seasoning, hot sauce, salt and pepper, thyme, and a dusting of garlic and onion powder. As long as I could defend what I had and keep myself safe, food wasn't the problem. The swamp provided. You just had to be patient, quiet. Crayfish and catfish were easy to come by if you knew how to wait. That week taught me how to be self-sufficient in the largest wetland network in the lower 48. And I wasn't the only one to face that kind of baptism. Rudy Cormier, his younger brother Damien, and a Creole elder named Pierre Monet had all endured their own trials in the basin. They knew how to vanish into the swamp without stirring the air, and there wasn't a creature or sound they missed. They moved like phantoms and noticed everything. Pierre was there now, seated on a short stool in the corner as the rain drummed relentlessly on the tin roof. His bloodshot eyes, rimmed in crimson against skin as dark as river silt, gave him a near-spiritual presence. Only the faint glimmer of light reflecting off his pupils reminded you he was flesh and bone. He was staring at someone across the room, his gaze sharp enough to draw flinches from the man caught in it. Not long ago, Pierre had been softly plucking at a battered ukulele with fingers twisted by time, letting out hushed, mournful tunes that seemed to twist the air itself. The man across from him twitched with every note. Pierre stopped strumming when I entered. I struck a match and brought another kerosene lantern to life, the flame bending and casting misshapen shadows against the corrugated metal walls. Rudy sat at the table across from me. In the dim far corner, the figure lifted his head just enough for the light to catch him. What I saw was the shell of a man who once carried pride like armor. His face was a mess. Purple bruises bloomed across his cheeks, and his lips were cracked, bleeding at the edges. His eyes were vacant, glassy, and dulled by some deep-rooted fear. I didn't need to know his story to see that he understood the cost of what he'd endured, and that surviving it hadn't been a blessing. But all that was behind us now, like the storm receding above. This place wasn't Jackson, and it damn sure wasn't the Natchez Trace. Here there were no stoplights or courtrooms, no rules but our own. Strip away the dates and the clocks, and we might as well have been sitting in the Jurassic, except for the 4 of us inside this rusted floating shack. "What now, Mandamus?" Rudy asked, leaning back. "When the storm lets up," I said. "Give him his gear, throw in a can of beans and sausage or whatever's left, then get him across the Bell River. Make sure he hits the Caisson Trail. He's not setting foot back here. But before that, I need a word with him, alone." Rudy and Pierre got up and stepped outside, taking cover beneath the awning on the port side. I turned my attention to the broken figure in the corner, trying to understand what he'd become. Pierre, years ago, had run with a shadowy crew, a Creole faction with Haitian bloodlines and quiet influence over the region. They kept to themselves mostly, but when things needed handling, they'd partner with Manfred Cormier. I remembered nights when I was young, Caleb having Manfred and 2 of his Haitian associates over. I never learned what business they discussed, but the air would be thick with smoke and tension. Once, I peeked down through the kitchen curtain, only to lock eyes with one of the guests. He stared straight through me. I tore up the stairs and shut the door to my room, their laughter chasing me down the hallway. A flash of lightning lit the swamp, momentarily transforming the room with twisted shadows. I looked again at the man who once thought himself untouchable. "Mr. Baylor, or whatever alias you plan to use in your next life, I've got a question for you." He raised his head, but his gaze didn't meet mine. He stared just past me, eyes locked on the rusted wall. How does a man spend 14 years convincing someone else's wife to betray her husband and think there wouldn't be consequences? His answer didn't matter. I wasn't asking to hear his truth. Some men let the legal system sort out their grievances, walk away humiliated but breathing. Others settle scores with a bullet and piss on the body to send a message. Still others cut off what makes you a man and leave it pickled on a dusty shelf. But me? I'm built different, Martin. I'd rather you sit here and feel what it means to be stripped, bit by bit, by the slow grind of life. Because the worst of it? You never see the next blow coming. And that's where we are now. But I'm not through. Not yet. I've still got questions. You understand me? He gave a hesitant nod. Good, let's start. You and Monique, 2 kids together, yeah? Another nod. Okay. Before all this, back when you were still with Clara, did the 2 of you ever talk about having children? He looked confused at first, startled by the question. Then his words came out, slow and broken, dragged across split lips. She wanted kids, yeah. I think about that sometimes, I told him. Ever wonder why she and I never had any? That's when it hit him. He saw what this was really about. If you lie, I warned, I'll carve the truth out of you, piece by piece. She had a miscarriage, he said quietly. After that, she couldn't carry again. That felt real. But I wasn't satisfied with truth alone. I wanted something deeper, what was mine, what had been taken. How'd she lose the baby? I asked. And tell me, was it yours? Or mine? I fixed my gaze on him, unblinking. He could see it in my eyes. Whatever came out of his mouth next would seal his fate. It was your baby, he said. How? I asked calmly. She fell. I didn't move. I didn't need to. She fell after I hit her, he admitted. Tell me everything, from the top. Martin Baylor didn't hesitate. He launched into the story. He'd been overseas when Clara became pregnant. When he returned and found out, rage overtook him. He struck her. The impact sent her to the floor, and the baby didn't survive. Then he told me how, drunk on power and anger, he'd made a cruel decision. He ordered doctors to sever her fallopian tubes, a permanent, irreversible choice, a way to ensure she'd never have children with anyone else, especially me. She belonged to him after that, at least in the physical sense, but once long ago she'd been mine where it counted. She never would have revealed any of this, unless her back was against the wall. I already knew it all, every piece. But hearing him say it out loud, confirming what I'd suspected, it made something in me want to snap. I held that rage down. Let it simmer quietly. Then I stood, poured myself a generous glass of brandy, and let the silence swallow the rest. Martin Baylor wasn't long for this world, not the way he'd known it. He was going to disappear, permanently. And as for Clara, though she returned to me after so many years, I couldn't tell if I even wanted her anymore. That's the curious thing about love, marriage, and women. Love doesn't always matter, not in Jackson. Reputation, leverage, appearances. That's what really runs the city. Baylor had reached his end. They both betrayed me, and now it was my turn to decide what came next. 2 nights later, once the storm cleared, Pierre Monet escorted a disoriented Baylor into the humid dark. He was guided onto a small boat waiting quietly at the dock, destined for the Quezon Chase, a cargo ship under a Haitian registry. They handed him a plastic bag, new papers, a false passport, and $300 in bills. In his pack were 3 changes of clothes and a few cans of smoked fish. 6 days later, the freighter departed from New Orleans, headed for the Dominican Republic. We both knew what that meant. He was never coming back, not alive at least. And if he ever dared return, the priest in Port-de-Paix had been instructed. The tongue would be the first thing to go. Rudy Cormier and I followed through. I reclaimed my dignity, and in doing so, reshaped more than a few lives. Rudy got his share, 30%, split with his crew. Monet and his boys took home 20. Me? I came away with something new, a future. Next chapter. Morning, Mr. Belvoir, Wendy sang as I stepped into my modern glass-walled office high above Laurel Street in Baton Rouge. She offered a knowing smile. Manicourt and Sizemore had just wrapped their quarterly meeting. Their final move? Appointing me CEO of Baylor and Devereaux. It was a giant step up from Jackson to Baton Rouge. If I'm honest, I'd never run a corporation before, but I was an engineer by trade and a damn good one. With Rudy pulling strings on the board, I had more influence than I let on. I renovated Caleb Old condo and moved Clara out of Jackson entirely. Surprisingly, she didn't fight it. If anything, she embraced the change. A year after Baylor vanished into whatever dark corners he crawled into, Clara gave birth to our son. I named him Caleb Marcus Belvoir. The doctors hadn't tried to repair the damage to her reproductive system. Instead, they suggested another path, in vitro, using her own eggs. It succeeded. I didn't stay with her because I forgave her. I stayed because I wanted the child we once dreamed of to exist. Had the injury been permanent, had she truly been barren, I would have walked away. But we didn't return to the marriage we once had, not even close. Emotionally, I kept my distance. Hiring Wendy wasn't just for admin work either. Does that make me a better man? I became colder, sharper. Still, I could smile. I could joke, play the part. I could share a bed with the woman I once loved, knowing her faithlessness was in the past. And I could raise my son, raise him right, with the pride of a Louisiana legacy behind him. As for Baylor, wherever he ended up, under whatever new name, he'd live the rest of his days with the shadow of me, never far from his heels. Epilogue. 18 years later, the boards of the old dock moaned softly beneath our feet as a warm bayou breeze rolled in. The storm had passed earlier that morning, leaving a wide blue sky overhead. "I still don't see what you boys love about this place," Clara said, shaking her head. Caleb M. turned to her with a grin. "This is where life starts, Mom. You can feel everything here." She sighed and kept stirring the pot of jambalaya. I pulled fresh tortillas from the oven and laid them out. Rudy Cormier lounged nearby, taking slow sips from a flask. He claimed it helped with the Parkinson's, though his hands never really stopped shaking. Still, he held on, for Patrick Cormier, his son, and for Monstoul Monet, Pierre's grandson. The two of them, along with Caleb M., were heading to LSU that fall. Dinner came and went, filled with easy laughter and the comfort of familiar company. Later, we sat on the deck with an open bottle of cognac. I looked across at Clara. She was 55 now. I was 57. Time had softened us both. She'd filled out over the years, but to me, she was still beautiful. The birth of our son had slowly worn away the bitterness in my heart. I forgave her, but I never forgot. I uprooted her from Jackson, sold the Nason house on Trace. With no family left in Mississippi, we never had reason to go back, except maybe when passing through. Instead, I made her into a woman of Louisiana. She learned the food, the customs, the rhythm of life here. She even earned an MBA from LSU. Today, she managed the home Caleb once lived in, my home now, with calm confidence. Wendy stayed a part of our world until Caleb M. was well into his early childhood, after which our journeys took separate turns. She eventually wed an attorney, stepped away from her career, and set about creating a new life with her own family. Some years earlier, word had trickled in, piecemeal and vague, about the death of an old acquaintance, Martin Baylor, who had been living abroad in Cayenne, French Guiana. He had died there, leaving behind a partner he'd never officially married and a young daughter they had together. At the time, Martin had found work tending bar at a humble hotel, where his companion had been employed as a cleaner. I contacted Rudy to see whether he might be able to arrange a modest financial gesture of support for the woman and her child. Later, as we were sorting through some old belongings, Clara uncovered a small tin container. Inside it were a few remnants from the past, a worn ashtray, several time-worn photographs of Rudy with Pierre Monet, and a man's gold ring. The ring was unassuming but finely crafted, adorned with a ruby and bearing the inscription Ole Miss across its face. Etched beneath were the year 1987 and the initials MB, matching a pair of gold cufflinks that lay beside it. She lingered briefly at the window, her gaze drifting over the endless expanse of wetlands and bayou that encircled us. Then, with a kind of reverence, she closed the box and returned it to its place on the shelf. When she turned back to me, our eyes met for a moment. And in that brief exchange, I caught a flicker, subtle and fleeting, of something unsettled beneath her calm demeanor. But just as quickly it was gone. By then, Caleb M. had joined us in the room. And so we stood there together, a family of sorts, bound quietly in the misty heart of the Atchafalaya Basin.